Hello, right, third section. I found the potato masher I was looking for, so I can continue now. I have tea, which makes life so much better. Somebody asked that when in the second broadcast I said a couple of times that describing paganism as a nature worshipping religion or set of religions is problematic. What did I mean by that? Well, it can be understood in a number of different ways, but the one we'll focus on for the moment is that there is an element of difficulty in defining what nature is, in a sense. Obviously, at one level, there is the nice, easy, straightforward bit that nature is trees and forests and mountains and oceans and fields and meadows and deserts and so forth. And that nature worship, if you use it in that sense, it kind of implies going out to the woods, going out to the jungle, going out to the fields or wherever it may be, in order to engage in religious acts, worshipping nature as a manifestation of the divine and that sort of thing. Which is fine as it goes, there's no issue with that really. Except that nature isn't quite that clear cut. It's not out there. I'm stood in a kitchen with cupboards made of wood. Are these cupboards unnatural? Well, obviously cupboards do not grow, although the wood they are made from grows. I'm stuffing or about to stuff my face when it's cooked with leek and potato soup. Soup is not a naturally occurring phenomenon, but then is this really any different from any other creature harvesting whatever it wants to eat and consuming it? I live in a house, it's not a natural thing, obviously, didn't fall out of the sky, but is that substantially different from a bird's nest or a termite mound or anything of that sort? There are all sorts of creatures that create and shape and manifest things. We are just very, very sophisticated as humans in the level to which we will shape and transform the world around us. We could also think of nature in terms of human nature. That nature isn't just lovely things out there and flowers and storms and beautiful stuff to watch. Anger, hope, despair, love, boredom, intellectual curiosity, all of these features of being a human, and I'm sure many other species have exactly the same mental processes as well. These are all part of our inner nature. And if we're going to talk about reverencing nature and worshipping nature, should that not include things that are human as well as trees and horses and buffalo and things out there? Why do you need to go to the woods in order to worship nature? Why can't you worship nature in your spare bedroom? If you take the opinion that everything that exists is nature, then your spare bedroom is as much part of nature as a bird's nest or a termite's mound. Obviously, it's much nicer to go into the woods, rather depending on what your spare bedroom's like. So this isn't so much about trying to confine people to bricks and mortar, but rather to expand our understanding as to what constitutes nature in the first place, and it's actually pretty much everything that exists can be considered a manifestation of nature, to some extent, both in the material world but also in the internal world, and sort of reverencing our own nature as well as the nature of other species and other creatures. It's just, why it's problematic is that some people get very hung up on wanting to be out in the woods and running through the fields and feel that they can't possibly be spiritual in a town or a city. That nature is, they're so kind of, if you like, tunnel visioned on nature being out there that they forget nature is in here too. He's trying to get a balance between the two. That's one of the reasons. You also get a slight Victorian kind of hangover from talking about fertility cults and things like that. Whilst certainly in the ancient world and many, many parts of the modern world, there are farmers who are very much concerned about the fertility of their fields and their cattle and so forth. For those of us who live an urban lifestyle who aren't farmers, well, you can focus on fertility in the sense of having 15 kids, although with 7 billion humans on the planet, I wouldn't recommend that one. But you can also focus it on it in more abstract ways. Fertility of mind, being creative, composing lots of music, writing lots of books, painting lots of pictures, baking lots of cakes, whatever it is that floats your boat in terms of how you express your creativity and your mental fertility, rather than just purely fertility of the body. But when Victorians were writing about tribes in the Amazon and ancient Greeks and Romans, they often spoke of it as all fertility worship, nature worship, as if it's something primitive and basic. And the implication is often that it's only kind of half-witted people that do it in the first place. What we're trying to say is that in the ancient world, plenty of pagans lived in cities. Plenty of pagans lived in big urban settlements and worshipped their gods in big urban settlements. The Romans reverenced Cloacina, goddess of the sewage system, just as much as they reverenced Pan in the fields and the mountains. And let's face it, without the sewage system, huge numbers of humanity would die from dysentery and all sorts of horrible related diseases. So something that is very, very urban and artificial and human manufactured in that way is nonetheless a vital, life-giving, health-preserving force that we should respect. And whilst it did amuse an awful lot of writers in previous centuries, this idea of potty old Romans worshipping the goddess of the sewage system, or whatever next, it's got a very practical basis to it. And certainly when you consider what happened to human societies once we'd abandoned creating sewage systems and we went back just to peeing in a pot and slinging it out the window, do we really want to go back to those sorts of times? Is it not healthier to adopt the reverence of human ingenuity that the Romans had than to favour a kind of an anti-technological primitivist approach to life? You don't be so obsessed with technology that it bogs you down, but equally you don't want to reject the advantages that human ingenuity can bring in terms of health and longevity and quality of life and so forth. So that's the bit of the problem with that. That said, I was in the second part going to talk about the idea of ancestor worship, and I just waffled so much it went by the wayside. An awful lot of paganism, both ancient and modern, embraces the importance of ancestry. And the idea that the dead are not gone. In some pagan traditions there is a belief in an afterlife, a sort of otherworldly realm like Elysium or the fields of Alu or whatever you want to call it. Other pagan traditions emphasise the notions of rebirth and reincarnation and coming back in some other shape, guise or form. Are these ideas mutually exclusive? And where do things like spiritualism and mediumship and contacting the dead sit in all of this? Because an awful lot of ancient pagan cultures, just like in the traditional religions of China and Japan and Africa and many other parts of the world, do seek advice and guidance from the ancestors. So there isn't this sense that the ancestors are all off so far away you'll never see them again. Quite the reverse. There's an importance attached to keeping in contact with your revered dead, as well as in many cultures a recognition that not all of the dead are terribly pleasant. So, for example, you'll find in China and ancient Rome and various other cultures rituals during the course of the year which will acknowledge that people who are vile and horrible and deeply disturbed in life are quite often vile and horrible and deeply disturbed in death. So it's not a sort of rosy, coloured spectacle view of the dead as all ethereal and lofty and lovely. There's a great sort of fleshing out to it. It is tempting to try and want to come up with some sort of theoretical approach that would enable all of these different views of the afterlife to sit equally well with one another. That sort of very, well, let's admit it, wishy-washy liberalism that wants everybody to get on together and not say one lot is right and the other lot are wrong and which I don't know is always an entirely ideal way to go, but let's seem to be where I usually end up going. One way of trying to understand pagan views of the afterlife, or at least some pagan views of the afterlife anyway, bearing in mind what we were saying several times over, that there's always variation somewhere out there. People who think something differently from what I'm telling you now. If human beings have at least three aspects to themselves, and I say at least because if we think about the ancient Egyptians, for example, a number of their teachings suggested that there are actually 9 aspects to the self. But we'll stick with 3 because it's an easier to manage number. There is my body, my flesh and blood. In some traditions there is also a belief in mind, psyche, as soul, that the mind is something that roams beyond the body at times, whether in sleep or whether in trance states or various other conditions, and it can see parts of the world and engage in things and talk to people and what have you, in a way that doesn't necessitate the body going along. Almost a bit like an ancient version of Facebook, you could argue. And indeed, if you want to be technical, we're now sort of kind of democratizing that process so that all sorts of people, even those who don't know how to meditate or engage in mystical acts, can go online and communicate with people far, far, far away from where their bodies happen to be ensconced on the sofa. But that is a bit of a trippy avenue to go down. Anyway, that personality, that mind, that psyche, that soul, can outlast the body. At least it can in a number of different belief systems. So even as the body is rotting away in the grave or crisping up on the funeral pyre, that soul potentially can go on persisting. In some cultures, in order to do so, that soul requires sustenance. It requires attention from the living. So the making of offerings and going to the grave and leaving flowers and all that kind of thing isn't solely for the benefit of the grieving families. It's also partly for the benefit of the person who has gone on, that it gives them a sort of an extenuated afterlife. A number of cultures also argue that there is a third part, an eternal part, a spark, a divine kind of presence. The ancient Egyptians had the idea that there was this sort of central bit of the human nature that went between body after body after body and remained this shining eternal light there, a spirit untouched by the transitory changes of flesh and the transitory changes of the mind that went with the flesh. That's an idea that you also get with the Romans and the Greeks and so on. And a number of them believed in a very similar idea. The Romans spoke about the genius that inhabits each man, or the euno, which is the feminine version within women. I don't think they had much to say about people whose gender didn't sit well with either male or female, but I may need to do a bit more research on that one to find out if they did. It doesn't leap to mind anyway off the top of my head. That eternal spark can be nurtured and fostered by prayer and so on, but even without it, even if that person is dead, gone, forgotten about, no one knows they even is left alive to know they ever existed in the first place, that divine spark continues on. If you allow that as a possibility, big if, I know, but if, then you could be in the position where the body has died and it's buried in a grave somewhere becoming worm food. And that is in itself a form of recycling. You know, that energy continues on, it feeds the worms feed the birds feed the cats, on and on it goes. But the psyche, that soul, the mind, lasts at least a while, if not forever, at least a while. And so when people claim to see ghosts, or mediums claim to communicate with the dead, I mean, sometimes they may be mistaken and they're interpreting phenomena in the wrong way entirely. But let's allow the possibility that that is what some people genuinely are doing, that maybe what they're contacting is that psyche, that kind of after echo of the personality developed in their lifetime, so that even if the divine spark, the spirit, has reincarnated, gone on to animate another body somewhere else, there is still the mind of one of the bodies inhabited by that spirit over the course of umpty hundred reincarnations, the mind is still echoing on. So think of a tree. The tree grows up, each lifetime is a branch, and the spirit is the central trunk. So that central trunk could have 50, 60, 100 branches coming off. And the central trunk knows each of its branches. And a passerby might look at one particular branch. So they are communicating with the mind of one particular lifetime. And a lot of the cultures that believe in the existence of such things often have the idea that those minds can develop after death. So it's not that they're frozen in amber. So if you were a horrible person in life, you'll always be a horrible person in death. Or if you were a very, I don't know, sporty type of person in life, you'll always be a very sporty type of person in death. But they allow that the soul, after it's departed the body, can itself change and develop in the afterlife or wherever it might end up. Not all forms of paganism believe that, not by any stretch of the imagination, but it's a way of trying to integrate a number of seemingly contradictory ideas from different pagan traditions to have an understanding of how soul might work. People like Uspensky and Gurdjieff, who were not pagan at all, they were mystics from various other traditions, argue that people are not necessarily born with a soul, but that they can acquire one through self-awareness, through study, through meditation, compassion towards others and so on. So rather sadly, people who never develop those qualities, either because they're just not very nice people, or who die very young before they've even had the chance to develop those qualities, simply blink out of existence. Whereas those who are fortunate enough to get the time and the space and what have you in which to develop those qualities can create a soul, create a part of themselves that will continue on after death, which is not the kindest idea in the universe, I admit, but then whoever says the universe has to be kind? We might wish the universe was a lovely place, but that don't make it so. And sometimes things can be true even if they're not particularly pleasant. But who knows? I'm not likely to know for sure until I'm dead, and if I'm completely wrong, then I still might not know if I blink out of existence entirely. But that's one way of viewing the possibility. And it also explains some of our festivities. So a lot of pagans, Druids like myself, and Wiccans and various others will celebrate the Feast of Samhain, which roughly falls on the date of Halloween in the secular calendar, as a festival for honouring the dead. It doesn't mean you can't honour the dead at any other time of year, of course you can, but that particular festival is especially for remembering those who have died in the previous 12 months, reflecting on how they contributed to our lives, what we've learned from them, be they friends, be they relatives, be they pets, be they some celebrity who's inspired us in whatever other capacity. It's a way of reflecting on the significance of those who have passed, and also it's a bit of a memento mori time of year in which you remember that one day you'll be dead as well, and you hope that there will be people standing around lighting candles and thinking nice thoughts about you. So it's an encouragement to make sure that you are the kind of person others think nicely of, not the sort of horrible sot that people are frankly glad to see the back of. Too many of them in the world. A lot of other forms of pagan tradition. The Romans have a similar date in their own calendar, not the same day, but they have a similar festival in their own calendar. The Greeks likewise, the Germanic tribes likewise have Winter's Night when they reflect upon the dead. All sorts of different pagan traditions have a time in the year when they think about those who have died, what the afterlife is like, reflect on the fact that one day they'll be there themselves, hopefully, and what they need to do to be the kind of person who is remembered in a very positive light. It's a prominent feature of both ancient paganism and modern paganism to have an understanding of the presence of the dead, and to recognise that the whole world is created the way it is by generation after generation after generation of dead people. We stand upon the shoulders of giants. Some of them lovely, wonderful people, some of them dreadful, terrible people, an awful lot of them just really rather average, humdrum people who have made the world what it is today, and that we, in our turn, are making the world what it will be in the centuries after our deaths, whenever that may be. Assuming we're not insane enough to blow ourselves all to smithereens and there's no one left alive to pass anything on to anyone. But that's a bit of a bleak subject, but one that's cropping up unfortunately at the moment with the world the way it is. Maybe that in itself is something to think about, not just what we do, but what the people we vote for, put into power, support, acknowledge, what they get up to in terms of creating the way the world will be in the future. Both the future that we'll be alive for, but also, just as importantly, the future long after we're dead and buried. So there's a strong emphasis on responsibility. What we'll think about in another podcast, if I can string enough brain cells together to do one, is pagan ethic and moral standard. One aspect of which is this issue of responsibility for the living our own lives and for the state we leave the world in for other people. Most pagan traditions put a big emphasis on joy and celebration and making life fun and nice and pleasant for people. There's no great list of things saying, oh, thou must not do this, thou must not do that. However, there is a strong emphasis in pretty much all of the pagan traditions that whatever it is that you take joy in life, whether that's drink or food or music or art or science or whatever the thing might be, that you enjoy it responsibly, so that your pleasure isn't bought at the expense of somebody else's despair and suffering. Responsible hedonism, if you like, but I say that's something we'll come back to in the future, and I think I've probably waffled on for more than enough for today, so I will leave it there and get the blender out, which will be very noisy, so I'm sure you don't want to listen to that. See you next time. Thank you.